Giovanni is not really a bad guy. He's in search of something.
Don Giovanni is a myth, is a legend.
He can play, he's an actor, he knows how to play these women.
Don Giovanni's relationships with the characters is one which is fundamental to how he is perceived as a character and also as a man and as an actor on stage. It's very useful for me to understand clearly where the relationships lie. Donna Anna, we see in the very first scene, of course, we have decided that she is somebody who is experiencing things for the first time, that she's inexperienced, not necessarily naive, but somebody who Giovanni would be interested for her position. She's engaged, perhaps that makes her more attractive. She's obviously the daughter of the top lawman in the region. He likes that risk element. So there's that relationship, which is in the end his undoing, because in this production, Giovanni cannot help but try to remind her that he is the seducer in a very inopportune moment. And she discovers, or realizes in the end, that Giovanni is potentially the murderer of her father. Donna Elvira, on the other hand, is somebody who arrives determined to find out what this monster, as she calls him in her very first sentence, what he has to explain for himself. Why did he leave? Why did he promise her so much?
Well, the funny thing is that they've only, previous to the beginning of the show as we see it, they have only been together for 3 days. Their relationship has lasted 3 days. But to her, obviously, that's a lifetime.
He did spend 3 days with her, so it says. So there must have been something interesting about her. Her character develops into something which at first is confrontational and perhaps a little pathetic.
He's disappeared and he's done a runner, and she's come to find out why and what's happened to him. So she is extremely hurt, and he doesn't take any of it seriously. He doesn't care. He's forgotten about her. Their relationship changes, dramatically throughout the piece, because initially she's in love with him and she comes to find him and hope to win him back. And very early on she discovers that that's not going to happen, he's not interested. And her love for him changes, I think, into a kind of desire to save him. She sees way before a lot of the other characters, I think, his fate. And so her love becomes kind of bigger than her in a way. And she decides that she's going to take it upon herself to save him.
And Giovanni realizes that she's turning into somebody who actually he can't compete with. So he's always just saying, no, I need her to go. She appears to be crazy, and he tries to convince others that she's crazy. She's actually got a lot of sense about, ethics and reasonability of behavior and constancy in relationships. So he's saying, no, I don't want that. I still have other things to do. The relationship with Zerlina, which is the only time we see a successful seduction by Don Giovanni, is perhaps the most complete, the most interesting, and the most dramatic. Because she starts as somebody who seems to be just a peasant, involved in a peasant wedding, and she goes all the way to being quite strong as a character. The initial encounter with Giovanni, we're already seeing that she has perhaps ideas that she could match this guy. She's not willing simply to allow him to sweep over her. And Giovanni realizes this, and I think as a final conquest, he perhaps enjoys it the most of any of that we would see. But for me, Don Giovanni and Zerlina is the linchpin of his sexual relationship. The ability for him to be able to show that his seduction and his charms are evident, that she is an attractive woman, that she gives in to him, is a very useful thing for me as a character. But for me, the most important relationship in the opera is that between Don Giovanni and Leporello. Now, these two need each other. They're an odd couple, perhaps. Leporello, I think, enjoys the fantasy of the life that he's leading. He's clearly a support to Giovanni, but complains all the time.
In this production, it's my Leporello is a normal guy. He's a servant, but more than a servant, I am like an assistant and family and friend and tax accountant, a little bit of everything. The relationship between Leporello and Giovanni is quite strong, and I have the feeling that Giovanni relies on me a lot, and I depend on him and he depends on me, which is a very good thing to do on stage, especially when you have somebody like Jerry playing it, because we play off each other.
The repartee between the two is often of a married couple, where they're bantering, bickering, but even from the very, very start, in the murder scene, there's a sense that if Leporello was not around, Giovanni would be alone, and this is something that Giovanni cannot possibly entertain. So it's a really useful relationship, because although he mistreats and gets a lot out of Leporello because of his inefficiency or his pranks or whatever, he still uses him absolutely as his support and depends on him completely.
Don Giovanni's canzonetta with mandolin in Act 2. Because this is for me an absolutely central scene in understanding Don Giovanni. Because this is the only time when he's completely alone. He's on his own. And what he sings, in a way, contradicts his actions, because the music is so heartfelt and so beautiful, and also somehow incredibly sad. And I think this part of Don Giovanni is very interesting to me, the infinite sadness about him, of which he is maybe not even aware. Well, it makes the things even worse, that he is not really aware of his problems and is running away from them.
One of the biggest challenges about Don Giovanni is playing a character which everybody sees in the auditorium, but actually he has these relationships with the people on the stage, and it's actually, he's more defined by those relationships than he is by how he's observed from the audience. And that's been a really interesting process to do.
Don Giovanni turns out to be being this common enemy to all of them, or common nuisance. He turns out to be the life principle in all of them, and when it's taken away, they are like puppets, when the strings are cut and the master puppeteer is gone. It is supposed to be the so-called il lieto fine, the happy end. But Mozart creates something opposite to happy end. He almost forces this D major upon everybody, because the shock of what has happened, not just with Giovanni's death, but the entire sequence of events from the opening of the curtain until then, is too big for the protagonists to simply go on about, with their lives. It turns out that everybody needed Don Giovanni even to punish him or to get the debts paid from him. or because people were dependent upon him and his evil and yet incredibly strong and therefore fascinating energy.
So it's like you've gone into a puddle and drunk. The idea for setting this production of Don Giovanni in the late 50s, early 60s, was to create a world that was on the cusp, a world that was about to change. An old regime was beginning to fade, beginning to decay, and something new was happening.
When Mozart wrote Donna Giovanni, he wrote it at a sort of watershed in European cultural history. It's the end of the Age of Enlightenment, the beginning of Romanticism. It looks back to Baroque almost, and also forward to Beethoven. So it's one of those great hinge moments, socially as well as in terms of music, of European history.
When we first had a meeting, Jonathan and I, we both came with the same idea of planting it around the same time. His thinking was inspired mainly by the Italian cinema, and this particularly by La Dolce Vita by Fellini. I was thinking more in terms of finding a period in Spanish history, because we wanted to play the piece in Spain, as it is said by Da Ponte and Mozart, which would be similarly transitional, and Franco's period came to mind, obviously, because that was the worst time for Spain, at least in the 20th century. And this extreme oppression coming from above, from the state, of which Commendatore is an important part. He is a servant of the state, and so is Don Ottavio. And so we both very quickly agreed on it being Franco, but not Franco of the Civil War, but Franco of already decaying regime in Spain in the 60s.
We wanted to update it to the extent that it became modern and understandable to an audience now, without being a historic piece.
Venite for avanti, vezzose maschere, è aperto a tutti quanti.
Paul Brown, the designer, really said his inspiration was looking at the principles as being that very high-class society, that real Vogue film star look.
I'm a splash of colour, I think, throughout a lot of it visually. They've put me in some very kind of strong outfits and colours, and I'm in red for most of the second act, so that's quite startling, I think.
To put Giovanni into that period where he is the driver of this sexual revolution, where perhaps there's the La Dolce Vita, which is effectively where we're trying to set it, against classic architecture, but very modern ideals about to happen. It's a perfect environment for Giovanni, and one which I feel very comfortable in.
Well, I mean, the idea about the set, it is a Pandora's box. It's a chamber that rotates in an ellipse on the stage. The idea is that it opens up to present the first scene. The first scene is quite comic. It has a man escaping from a lady's balcony, and I think one wants to create a world for the audience that they feel safe and that is comic and that one can respond to in a very jovial way.
It is like looking at a magical crystal through the sun rays. However you turn it, you always discover a new dimension to it. And there is always something which escapes your attention at the first glance. So you need to look at it again and again and again. The process never stops.
The difficulty of the piece is that it moves from location to location, and what I was very keen on is that we never stopped. And that from the moment the killing happens, which I think is key to Don Giovanni, and actually is the reason that he goes to hell, not because he sleeps with lots of women, but from that moment it's an inexorable move towards his final damnation. And it was important, Paul Brown, the designer, and I spent a lot of time working out how we could keep the momentum going, and with any luck it's a sort of white knuckle ride.
It has its complicated mechanics and occasionally dangerous elements to it. It's a very contactable set. We are all over the set. I mean, we're like ants scrambling on it. It has a slightly surreal element to it. It's not fixed in any particular place. There are elements of each reveal into the scene as a more an impression of where we are.
And you have to learn it as you have to learn the music. You have to learn where the set's moving, in what direction, at what speed, because otherwise, you know, it can be incredibly dangerous. And Act 2, there's a massive rake that I'm kind of clambering up and down for a lot of the time. So yeah, you have to get quite fit to do a production like this, I think. You can't just stand and sing anymore.
Towards the very end of Act 1 is a lightning bolt from God, strikes into the room, sets fire to the room. And Don Giovanni is penned up in his own hell, and that's only the end of Act 1.
And then we have no fire from then on. From then on, it just gets colder and colder. Hell is traditionally, actually, it was not hellfire, but it was ice. It was cold, and I think from then on, it gets he moves towards a terrible, terrible chill.